BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. On Fridays this year, I've been talking to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be discussing the book Still Missing: Rethinking the D.B. Cooper Case and Other Mysterious Unsolved Disappearances by Ross Richardson. And yes, as you can see from the title, that is one of the lengthiest sections in the book talking about D.B. Cooper, although this book does cover other stories, which I might discuss in some future episodes. And in a lot of these Cooper Friday segments, I've been talking to you guys about the different D.B. Cooper suspects. Some people believe that they have identified D.B. Cooper. Other people believe that it's still a mystery. Some people think that D.B. Cooper is someone completely unknown, that he died after he jumped out of the plane in 1971. But this book, Still Missing by Ross Richardson, really zones in on D.B. Cooper's actions on the plane and around the time of the jump. And I think that this would be something valuable to discuss for Cooper Friday. Firstly, to provide the most basic introduction, and all of this source material is coming from Ross Richardson's book, just saying that D.B. Cooper boarded a plane using the name Dan Cooper. D.B. Cooper was an alias that was falsely given to him by the media, and he had a briefcase which contained what appeared to have been a bomb, and he held everybody on the plane hostage, and this was on November 24th of 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. And someone was critical of me for using the term Thanksgiving Eve in a previous broadcast, but I just want to point out that a lot of people refer to the D.B. Cooper skyjacking as taking place on Thanksgiving Eve. Even in Ross Richardson's book, the term the eve of Thanksgiving is used. So I think that that's a fair thing to say. And D.B. Cooper's on the plane. He holds everybody hostage. He ultimately demands $200,000 in cash as a ransom. So the plane lands, and then one of the stewardesses goes off and she retrieves the money and brings it on board. And D.B. Cooper ultimately, long story short, would request 4 parachutes in the end. And this is something that Ross Richardson shared in his book, and I'm somewhat of a newcomer to the case. So he said that D.B. Cooper ordered the plane to take off with the aft stairs down, but they said that they were unable to do that, so they took off with the aft stairs up, and then while they were in flight at around 10,000 feet, D.B. Cooper had the aft stairs go down. And this is something that is a little bit twofold, because on the one hand, everything is indicating that D.B. Cooper had very intense knowledge of aviation. That's what I like to say on Cooper Friday, that he was somebody who knew that people would respond to his demands. He requested that the plane fly at 10,000 feet. He knew that the aft stairs could be lowered without cockpit override. And even in Ross Richardson's book, Still Missing, he states that D.B. Cooper most likely had an intimate knowledge of aircrafts. And I completely agree with that. But this detail about ordering the plane to take off and with the aft stairs down, and that was an impossible thing to do for the crew, so they say that seems to be somewhat of a conflicting idea. Either that or it could just be a piece of misinformation. But then D.B. Cooper is on the plane, and he jumps out into the night, into cloud cover, and he is never seen again. He has the money with him, the briefcase, which may have contained a bomb, but he left behind his clip-on tie on the plane, and he also left behind the glass that he was using to drink a bourbon and 7-Up, and also 8 Raleigh cigarettes, the butts of 8 Raleigh cigarettes. Now, the book Still Missing talks a lot about the D.B. Cooper suspects, and the first one that's discussed in the book is actually John Emil List, someone whom I've mentioned before during these discussions on D.B. Cooper, but not greatly in depth. There's also a very big section on Richard McCoy, and it goes into some of the other suspect discussions as well. But for this episode, I would really like to focus on the actions and behaviors of D.B. Cooper on the plane, because I told you guys on a previous Cooper Friday that I watched the documentary The Skyjacker That Got Away, and their biggest highlight during that documentary, for lack of a better term, is that D.B. Cooper did not request $100 bills. He requested 20s for, well, he didn't request 20s. He did not request $100 bills, so they brought him the bills in 20s. I repeat, they brought him the bills in 20s, and this would have added 15 pounds of weight. All of this is in Ross Richardson's book as well, and that's just saying that 15 pounds of weight could have greatly encumbered a skyjacker, it could have greatly hindered his ability to jump, it could have greatly held him down when he was trying to jump out of the plane at 10,000 feet into inclement weather and at night. And on a previous Cooper Friday, I was discussing Nat LaFoque's book, which talks about E. Howard Hunt as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And through my correspondences with the person who recommended the episode on E. Howard Hunt, he even just pointed out that in favor of Nat LaFoque and in favor of his theory, what if D.B. Cooper were somebody such as a person who would have known that there were only $20 bills available, no specific request would be made for hundreds or 50s or anything, because he would have known that there was money put aside in a bank that was in $20 bills. Somebody like E. Howard Hunt, somebody like Ted Braden, somebody who had connections to the CIA, and then this person would have just already known about that, so he would have anticipated that he would be jumping with 15 pounds of extra weight. Okay, that's some of the stuff that I shared on previous Cooper Fridays. Now, in this book, Still Missing, there is a discussion on the possibility of D.B. Cooper being a type of CIA operative, CIA asset, or CIA contractor. And one of the pieces of evidence that is put forward for this theory, and Ross Richardson doesn't endorse it, it's just discussed in the book, is that after D.B. Cooper jumps, November 24th, 1971, on November 25th of 1971, they are searching for him with an SR-71 Blackbird. And he's like, this is one of the highest end planes in the military, maybe the highest end plane that the military had, and they couldn't find him. Extremely powerful jet. And they're just like, this is overkill when it comes to the type of search party that would be going on for some guy who jumped out of a plane with $200,000. Yes, he was a terrorist in some regards. Yes, he held a bunch of people hostage. He might have had a bomb. But was this act of extreme surveillance done because he was a CIA asset contractor or operative and they were trying to locate him? Was it somebody like Ted Braden that went rogue? Was it somebody like E. Howard Hunt who had a James Bond complex? And, I mean, I can't answer that, of course, but I think that you guys can tell from the way I talk about that particular theory on Cooper Friday that I have been leaning toward that a little bit, that D.B. Cooper may have had connections to an intelligence agency, not necessarily the CIA. You could make a reasonable case for the FBI, or maybe even another government body, that the reason why this person jumped out of the plane with the money was not because he was just some angry person who was trying to commit a thrill jump. He was doing this either on behalf of the intelligence agency, or he was doing this because he was going rogue, and then they just immediately tried to silence him. Maybe they actually found him, and then they just put a lid on everything. So that's one thing that's discussed in the book Still Missing. Now here's something else. Let's say that D.B. Cooper was not a CIA operative. Let's say that he wasn't working for the FBI, or he's working for the government and they're just trying to boost regulations with the airlines. What is something else that could have happened? Ross Richardson shares one theory that has to begin with a question. If D.B. Cooper did not survive the jump, well then what happened? Where was the body? Where was the parachute? Where was the briefcase? Where was this bomb, if it was indeed a real bomb? Where are all the things that D.B. Cooper had? Because if they found one of the plates from the plane that could have come down from the jump, then why couldn't they find more? If they found 3 stacks of bills at Tina Bar, why couldn't they find more? And one theory is, what if D.B. Cooper landed in the water, and the moment that he landed, his bomb detonated, and that caused an explosion, and then just he was blown to smithereens? And we're talking about people who are looking for things like a parachute and a briefcase and a man in a suit, when in all reality, they wouldn't really find anything like that because things like the current in the river. Now this is, again, not something that Ross Richardson is endorsing in the book. It is a theory that is being discussed. And I'm just, reading this and I'm thinking, I am not an expert on this. I'm not a biologist. I'm not an explosives expert. I am not an osteologist who knows the human skeleton inside and out. And I'm also not someone who understands the fibers of a briefcase better than the next person. But I would expect from watching a bazillion true crime shows and a bazillion movies that if somebody were blown to quote-unquote smithereens, there would still be evidence left behind, that there would still be a bunch of fragments found, that if his bomb had detonated, let's say it was a real bomb that D.B. Cooper's carrying, and it exploded upon impact, whether it's on the ground or in the water, there would be more physical evidence. And if they are searching for this with an SR-71 Blackbird, there would be perhaps a lot more physical evidence. And if this guy wasn't a CIA operative and it's just some lone random skyjacker that died during the jump, why cover it up? Why not just have the biggest news story of the year or something? A guy skyjacks a plane, he jumps out, and then there's an explosion. I mean, what would be the reason to cover that up in the media? So I think that that's just where I have to leave it, because this is a theory that gets discussed more and more and more, and it is one that is more or less endorsed by all mainstream sources. A lot of mainstream sources are just like, D.B. Cooper would not have survived the jump. They're like, even the FBI talks about this. They don't believe that D.B. Cooper survived jumping into the night. And my simple response is, well, where's the physical evidence? Where's the parachute? Where's his body? And one theory that is also discussed, it's mentioned a little bit in Ross Richardson's book, but also I was watching a video, I can't recall the exact one or else I'd cite the source, but it's talking about how they didn't even believe that D.B. Cooper could have opened his parachute. They didn't even believe that D.B. Cooper would have had the ability to do that in inclement weather. And again, going back to the CIA operative angle, E. Howard Hunt, Ted B. Braden, maybe even Robert Rackstraw, he would have practiced this stuff at night. And when I was listening to the interview with Mike Davis, an Army staff sergeant, he talked about how the military does train to jump at night. I know it sounds like it goes without saying, but I just want to put that out there. The military is the group that trains to jump at night. So this doesn't sound like it would be completely impossible. And I've told you guys a couple points. If D.B. Cooper didn't survive the jump, where's the physical evidence? Point number 2, it's not completely incomprehensible and implausible and impossible to jump at night and survive. Okay, those are 3 things. But in addition to reading Ross Richardson's book, I also found a video from Channel 2 News on the West Coast, and it was from 1980. It was talking about the discovery of the 3 stacks of bills that were found at Tina Bar named for the sandbar, where the 3 stacks of bills were found that were connected to the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. It was about $5,800, and this particular broadcast was fair, it was honest. They interviewed lots of locals talking about, do you think D.B. Cooper could have survived the jump if he landed in the Columbia River or a nearby lake or a nearby tributary of the river? And they also did some investigations with the particles that were in the water, and they expect that D.B. Cooper's money was actually upstream at a point where I guess you would say it was downstream and it ended up upstream, which seems a little bit weird. And that goes back to the theory that it could have been dredged by a boat. And also, they shared some info that there was a big dredge in 1971 when a lot of the sort of ground beneath the earth was pulled up and the river floor was dredged and moved over to Tina Bar. And ultimately, there was about 100 miles of sand and coastline on the Columbia River, and they dug deep into the riverbank to see if they could find more, even using construction equipment to see if they could find more money or some more physical evidence, and all they found were the 3 stacks of bills. So I think that, again, any theory involving D.B. Cooper landing in the Columbia River and not surviving, or landing in the Lewis River or the nearby lake and not surviving, just needs to be supported by the fact that there is not a lot of physical evidence. I mean, that's kind of a contrary fact. But, I mean, right now, can I just ask you guys, do you think that it's possible that D.B. Cooper survived the skyjacking? Almost all of the suspects that I've talked about on Cooper Friday have survived. Actually, I think every single suspect I've talked about was alive after the skyjacking, not like somebody who has disappeared and just never seen again. but they seem to have some very clear motives. Question number 2. What do you think about the theory that D.B. Cooper's bomb detonated while he was in the sky, while he landed in the water, and as soon as he makes impact with either the ground or the water, or maybe when he's jumping out of the plane, and that he was just blown to pieces? What do you make of that theory? I mean, part of me wants to just latch onto it and just play the skeptical card and be like, well, they didn't find anything, therefore he was blown to bits. But I just don't think that that's what happened, because somebody would have found some type of fragment of the parachute floating around or something, or there would have been a fragment of the parachute with the burn mark, a fragment of the briefcase with the burn mark. So says me anyway. I guess it would depend on the power of the dynamite. But that begs the question of, why would 3 stacks of bills survive, and why would they be landing in one place? Because that suggests much more that D.B. Cooper landed somewhere and he was at Tina Bar for a period of time, or the money was at Tina Bar for a period of time, and then they simply fell out, and that they were simply in the river and they washed ashore, or that they ended there after a successful landing. But that's just my take on the subject. I want to know what you think about that. Now, as far as D.B. Cooper jumping out of the plane, and he would have been facing temperatures of 22 degrees in the air, he also would have been dealing with winds that were going at over 40 miles an hour. And one thing that was estimated for the temperatures of the waters in the nearby bodies of water that I've talked about, like the Lewis River and the Columbia River, is that the water temperature would have also been estimated to have been 40 degrees. And I remember going swimming at the beach when I was a kid, and they posted something like the water temperature was 65 degrees, and I was like, oh, well, that's got to be warm, right? 65-degree water. I mean, that sounds like a big number to me, and I was like, 7 or 8 years old, and that was pretty cold. That was pretty cold. So 40 degrees, I would expect that would be very cold, especially if you landed in it jumping from 10,000 feet. And what they're saying is that he actually would have had about 20 to 30 minutes. This is all from Ross Richardson's book, mind you. 20 to 30 minutes before hypothermia would have set in. And by hypothermia, I believe they mean hypothermic shock. Now, 20 to 30 minutes, that is really not an impossible amount of time to regain composure if there's any type of disorientation when he hit the water, as well as just being able to get ashore and get out of his clothes, and possibly if he had a boat stash by somewhere nearby, then it could have just gotten on the boat. And this is why I really do like the theory that was put forward by Bill Rollins, that D.B. Cooper jumped and he landed near the Lewis River. And then he landed either in or near the Lewis River. He could have landed in the water, and he had a boat station nearby. He got into the boat, and then the boat went to the Columbia River. And as he was moving around, he dropped the 3 stacks of bills in the Columbia River. But that begs the question of, why wasn't the money ever seen again in circulation? Why wasn't the money ever used? Why didn't anyone ever try to spend it? And maybe D.B. Cooper himself wouldn't be going to a 7-Eleven and trying to buy a bottle of Coca-Cola with the $20 bills from the heist. But what about the people who may have encountered the money? He never tried to use it at all. This is another thing that pushes me toward that type of CIA operative theory. But as I said, I don't endorse it. I'm just curious about it. I definitely think there's insufficient evidence for that. And there's a difference between just wanting to know more about a particular theory and just being gung-ho for it, banging the drum all the way home and saying, this is what I think happened. However, to look at some points in Ross Richardson's book, there are 2 big things that I take exception with. And one of them is that it's not a statement from Ross Richardson himself. He is actually just responding to a statement from the FBI when they say that a big problem with the concept of D.B. Cooper surviving the skyjacking is he had no help on the ground. And as I was just reading that in this book, Still Missing, I was thinking, now wait a second, how on earth do they know that with 100% certainty? I mean, you could say it's unlikely that he would not have had help on the ground because of this reason or that reason, but are stating it as a certifiable fact. D.B. Cooper had no help on the ground because he wouldn't have had the ability to coordinate with any type of responder. Even if it's a single person, even if it's a single accomplice, he would not have had the ability to communicate with this person. And again, I'm just thinking that this is something that is not completely impossible. It's not completely implausible. There are all sorts of ways to communicate, and there could have been a specific point that they were looking for. And I know what this person from the FBI is trying to say is that even if they had planned it out where D.B. Cooper is going to jump at the exact point, they couldn't guarantee that he would land at the exact point. I completely get that, and I talked to you guys about the wins for a second, but to say that he didn't have anybody on the ground waiting for him, I think that that's a premature statement, or I don't think that people have enough information about D.B. Cooper to say that that's exactly what happened, because in some of the suspect theories, accomplices are used, particularly in the one involving Kenny Christensen. But then there's also another one that was discussed in Ross Richardson's book, Still Missing. Again, it's not from him. He's discussing what someone else has said, and that is that D.B. Cooper had no plan for when he landed on the ground. And this is one, though, that also really bothered with me, because how on earth could you say that D.B. Cooper had no plan? And when you read the books and listen to the comments from other people about their own theories on how D.B. Cooper was able to get away with this, a lot of them are centered on D.B. Cooper what? Having a plan. To say that D.B. Cooper had no plan when he was going to land on the ground, I mean, how do you know that? You don't. I mean, that's the long and short of it. And I would go back to Mike Davis, who made the statement that when somebody is going to plan something out like some type of paratrooping expedition in the military, they're going to plan 96 hours in advance at the time of landing on the ground. People with military backgrounds and maybe even a CIA background would understand this, and the steps would be put in place to land safely and then get away from whatever type of danger that would exist. So I think that this is also just something that makes absolutely no sense to me. I don't even know why people would put themselves out there by making comments like that. And it doesn't have to be anything overly extraordinary. Even if you think that D.B. Cooper wouldn't have planned 96 hours in advance, think about that comment that I made from Bill Rowlands. Oh, well, he had a boat stationed at an exact location. I mean, something to that effect. Now, I know what the first person was saying about how even if they had put in, an extremely meticulous amount of planning, there could have been unforeseeable circumstances. There could have been things that would have affected the plan. You couldn't guarantee jumping out of a plane at 10,000 feet in the dark during cloud cover would mean that you'd be able to get to a desired location. I completely understand that, but to say that D.B. Cooper had no accomplices and that he didn't have a plan for when he landed, those statements are just unfair, unrealistic, and the fact of the matter is, we don't know enough to completely rule those things out. But I would love to know your responses to anything here, and I would also like to ask the challenge question to you guys. Do you believe that because they were looking for D.B. Cooper with an SR-71 Blackbird, that this is a higher chance that he was involved with the CIA? What is your response to that challenge question? Number 2, do you believe that D.B. Cooper had an accomplice? And number 3, really these are like questions 4, 5, and 6. But also, do you believe that D.B. Cooper had meticulously planned what he was going to do after he landed on the ground? I'd love to read your responses down below. Please share anything you want in the comments section. And also, to all of you who have been following Black Box Online Radio for some time, this weekend I will be uploading an episode of an MSNBC true crime documentary as a resource on this channel. It was sent to me by Sam Fisher, and it's going to be discussing the Zodiac Killer and his suspect, Joseph Paul Franklin. It's a documentary that's made about Joseph Paul Franklin, who was a real serial killer called the Racist Killer, and Sam has made some commentary notes and shared them. And that will be available this weekend on BBOR. And if you just want to follow along with more general true crime discussions, this summer I'm going live every Tuesday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here on BBOR, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and of course Ripper Wednesday, talking about Jack the Ripper, and Cooper Friday, talking about D.B. Cooper Overall, though, I found that Ross Richardson's book, Still Missing, was very engaging. There's only one section that's devoted to D.B. Cooper, and the other sections talk about other stories. But the D.B. Cooper section is very engaging. It's very fast-paced. It's easy to follow. And I'm definitely going to refer back to it when I do some individual episodes on the suspects that he's talked about, because some of the suspects are ones that I haven't even covered on Cooper Friday. And I think that it's about maybe 50% of the section is devoted to discussions on the suspects, and another 50% is devoted to the actions of D.B. Cooper. But if you'd like to check out the book, it's called Still Missing by Ross Richardson, and it's available on Amazon.com. And that will be it for me now. Just saying you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. Visit some links in the description box. My personal Facebook is in there, as well as BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram. And I release shorts and reels every day here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, talking about true crime cases. And there's also BuyMeACoffee.com, BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNid88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. That will be all for me now. Until next time.